All right.
Russell, did
So
you get your your CLIT question in, or did you want to do that one?
I do want to do that one. Um, all right. So in conjunction with Public last week, you broke the story of Cyber Threat Intelligence League, otherwise known as CLIT. This is what this is what you had to say about that. He said, I don't favor censorship, but if I did, I'd want to be sure the people doing it did not all come from the same economic and educational background. That's clearly the case with CLIT and others like it. These folks come from the same schools and tax bracket. They vomit out the same prefab Flauberian bourgeois idiocies, inhabit the same informational bubble, and boast the same immunity to proletarian frustrations, read reality. And you also said something similar, although I'm taking this from your article. I think you changed it a little in your statement, but in your written version of your statement for Congress, you said take away the highfalutin talk about countering hate and reducing harm and anti disinformation is just a bluntly elitist gatekeeping exercise. If you prefer to think in progressive terms, it's class war. So, can you explain what this organization is and why you believe the war on disinformation at this point? I haven't really heard you use this language very much before, but it seems to be a conclusion you're coming to now that it's really about class.
Well, that's one of the things that happens when you cover something. It takes a long time to see the whole picture sometimes, right?
Sure.
When I did the Wall Street thing, I was probably 2 or 3 years into it before I fully understood the whole scam, of
Right.
mortgage-backed securities. Here, it takes a while to see that. Well, first of all, let's get what is CTI League. CTI League was sort of a precursor to the Election Integrity Partnership or the Reality Project, and it was designed by this very eccentric British woman named Sarah Jane Turp, S.J. Turp. She's a data scientist and former British defense analyst. She worked at a company called an open source company called Ushahidi. Started there in February of 2014. Another person who joined at that exact same time was a person named Jonathan Morgan, who was the CEO of a company called New Knowledge, which was the Senate analyst for the Russian bot report, but they also did that phony deal where they created fake Russians in the Alabama Senate race, and then they were behind Hamilton 68
Right.
as well.
Right.
So there's a weird Hamilton 68 connection with these people. Anyway, she, in conjunction with this defense official named Pablo Brewer, they set up sort of a volunteer review group to look at ostensibly just COVID misinformation. But we had a whistleblower came forward to Michael basically with all the documents from that group. And what we learn is that basically this volunteer private organization was basically created because DOD, DHS, and Global Engagement Center, and even the CIA and NSA can't do it legally. And so you create these kind of quasi-private structures through which the censorship is done. You guys know the basic thing. But the thing that, and this is the punchline, I think, for all the stuff since the Twitter files is, when you get right down to it, all these programs are very similar. They're run by the same group of people. They go back and forth between media, intelligence, and government. But they all went to the same Ivy League schools that we talked about. And the one thing they all have in common is none of them come from hardship, right? There are no ordinary people involved in doing this work, and that's kind of crucial to understand. It's like you have to be credentialed to get into this thing, and it's almost like having a literacy test for voting. Like there's a reason why that was a fucked up idea. Well, this is the same thing. Like you're not going to get to be censoring content unless the EU has very specific language about what kind of you have to be credentialed to be what they call a trusted flagger. And I did a FOIA request on one of these programs, and even just to do the grunt work of cleaning up the material for the reviewers, you had to have a bachelor's degree. The people who did the actual reading had to have master's degrees. So it's going to be sort of affluent professional class, people all around the world censoring everybody else. And that's kind of the key, I think, to understanding this whole thing. CTI League is important just because additionally, because it gives us a window into this other universe of shit that we didn't see in the Twitter files, which is the offensive stuff, where they fake news stories and invent things and create sock puppet accounts and stuff like that. We're going to probably learn that they do that a lot more than we thought, but that's coming still. So.
Well, one of the things that really struck me in your article, because you guys got a lot of footage of them and audio of them talking. What often strikes me about people with these credentials and these degrees is that fundamentally they're dumb as dog shit and as boring as milk. They're just the flattest, most uninteresting people, and you really get the sense that they cling so tightly to mores because they have nothing interesting to say. They would have nothing to say if they weren't spouting platitudes and gatekeeping and telling other people what to do. Like, what do they have to recommend them? How could they possibly gain any power other than to suck onto social values and appoint themselves to enforce them? Why would anyone pay attention to them?
I mean, there's a woman in one of the videos named Deb Lavoie who was part of this thing called the Reality Team, and she says things like, "Yeah, I don't know a whole lot, but I know about narratives."
Yeah,
and then they have no problem editing or reviewing people who have PhDs in biological sciences, even though they don't know anything themselves. And then they come out and say things like, well, we're going to do the same things that the bad guys do, but we're going to do it for good reasons. That's when you start getting into creating sock puppet accounts and creating distractions so that people can't read what they deem to be harmful material. And that's why this stuff is so dangerous, because it's not just suppressing true content. They're also going to be kind of fundamentally altering reality in other ways by introducing all kinds of fake stuff into the ether, and we'll have no way of figuring out what it is at a certain point. I mean, right now we're all trying as hard as we can to point it out. I mean, you guys do it, everybody. The whole alternative media is very right now focused on identifying fake stuff and exploding it, but you can't get everything, and then pretty soon they're going to be able to do this so well that it'll be impossible to detect. That's what's scary about it.
Well, if there's an element of hope, it is how dumb this audio exposes them as. You actually have audio there where they're trying to figure out how you determine if a medical research report is actually wrong, and nobody knows. And they're asking, so how do you are there places you can look to find that out? And the person they turn to as like the expert is like, yeah, there are places you can go, so just look for them.
There are academic paper places. These are the people. I mean, that's what's so fucking terrifying. I mean, and I was saying this to Walter. It's a little like the end of the trial when he gets dragged away for execution, and he sees that it's like these three pot-bellied dumb actors who are taking him away to be executed. Underneath the surface of these highly sophisticated programs are these absolute fucking idiots, and it's a little hard to accept at first, but it's fundamental to understanding this whole thing. I interviewed a lot of the military folks who did the counterterrorism stuff. That they built a lot of these tools. Those people are smart. Like they were they were out there doing battle with ISIS and Al Qaeda and whatever you might think of them morally. They actually understood. These are smart people, right? Like,
right.
These people are idiots.
These are busybodies.
Right. Yeah. They came from like corporate marketing. They're like, software marketing executives. If you notice in those videos, the one person who doesn't sound like a total idiot is the DoD guy, and that's consistent with what we've seen. But yeah, that's what's terrifying about this is that on the domestic speech suppression front, you're going to see all these people who have no real life experience editing, becoming editors in chief of the universe, and that's the future, which is great,
Well, you had, I think this was my favorite one, and this was kind of the star piece. You have like the ultimate shitlib bitching about her shitlib in-laws.
Oh my God.
For not being informed enough. Like I think if there's any satisfaction here, it's what the release of this material has done to her family dynamics. But she goes on about how her in-laws are liberals, but they only regurgitate what they get from TV, and what they really need is to be programmed by the likes of her,
right? So
that they can better argue their liberal positions and not just be on autopilot.
She even has some kind of quote in there, like if you can even call it thinking, or like if you can even call it their ideas, if you can even call them, it's something like so fucking insulting.
It's going to be a very awkward Christmas.
Oh, yeah. I thought about that. I thought you don't often get a chance to send a cruise missile directly into somebody's family, but look, I would have preferred to interview this person and find out what she's thinking, but they didn't want to talk to us. So, and by the way, that stuff was public anyway. We got it from a whistleblower, but they left it online also. So it's not our fault that it's out there. But yeah, and then by the way, that wasn't the only one. There's another one where she's talking about her son, and about how he thinks everything is bullshit, and he's just a nihilist, and we need to find, sort of easier ways to penetrate minds like his and stuff like that. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. These people are very, very affected by their interactions, but with their relatives, which should tell you a lot. Like you're going to decide the information landscape for the entire world based on how your, holiday dinner went. I mean, really? But yeah, people are like that. It's just crazy. And that's why that's by the way, that's one of the reasons why we're getting calls from some of the military folks, is because they're losing their mind seeing this stuff being applied over here. Like, we didn't spend 20 years designing these evil weapons to have them put in the hands of people like this, so.
That's a point Chris Hedges always makes, that eventually the things that they do overseas will be used against the population.
Always, yeah. And I guess naively, I didn't expect that would happen, but no, I did. I mean, I at least theoretically, I thought it could, but I never thought it would come back like so directly. And that is the story of this. This is the war on terror come home. And we're just seeing what it looks like, I mean, we haven't. Walter talks a lot about how we haven't had the first domestic droning yet, but it's probably not far off, I would imagine. So, we'll come to that. But yeah, those documents are amazing for sheer humor value. If your listeners haven't checked them out, I would strongly recommend it.
Definitely check those out at Racket. If I might suggest a title for your follow-up, The Banality of Shitlibs.
That's not bad. I like it.
Please clap.